Hi, in this video we're going to do a demo walkthrough of how to set up a loopback source. And a loopback, if you're not familiar with the concept, is essentially a type of source that you can set up that will immediately ingest data right off of a virtual output. So as soon as an output finishes, then a new ingestion is going to kick off in your loopback source. And a common use case for this is usually when you're blowing out the grain of the data of a source. So for example, if you're pivoting or unpivoting data, that's an extremely common example of when you might use a loopback, but there are many other reasons why you might use this type of source. Now, the first thing that you're going to do when you open your DataForge workspace is you're going to have your original source. So in this case, we have invoice details. We can see there's roughly 1,500 records. And if I look at the raw schema, I can see that there are essentially unique columns for different items within this data set. So we have item 2, item 3, and then we have each attribute of those items, again, in unique columns. So we have, the size of item 1, size of item 2, size of item 3, same thing with invoice quantity here. And we really don't want to work with the data this way. We want to get it into a standard set of columns where each item is a unique record. And that's really where our loopback comes into play. So what we do at the start of this is we have this source and we'll hook this up to an output. And so I already have that created here. And really the main part of this output setup is that you set it up as a virtual output. So it's going to create a view in Databricks. And then what's going to happen with the loopback is we're going to have a source pointed at that view. So every time the view definition gets updated, the source will then ingest the data. So if we look at our mapping, the way that this example is working is we have that same source, invoice details, hooked up as 3 different channels on the same output. And we can see that each channel has each one of those unique items. So we've got item 2, item 3, and then each of their associated attributes. So what we're going to do now is, now that we've got our virtual output created, if we go to the sources tab, we can create a new source. And so we'll give it a name. We'll call it invoice details unpivoted to keep it easy. And then we're going to leave the processing type as batch. We're going to change the connection type to be loopback. And we can see that this really narrows down our settings here. And so really the main portion of this is that you select this virtual output dropdown and you select that virtual output that this should be hooked up to. And now in this example, I'm going to change the data refresh to be keyed. And so we got to look for our key columns. So if I go back to my output, I know that my key columns already are going to be invoice detail ID and item. So if I go back to my source, I can add those. And now we'll save this. Okay, so now that we've got our loopback source all set up and ready to go, now what we can do is go back to that original source, so the invoice details, and we'll reset output here. And what we'll see is essentially, again, when this output runs, as soon as that output is completed, a new ingestion will then get kicked off for our new loopback source. Okay, and so we can see that our output finished. So now we'll go back to the loopback source. And now we see that new ingestion kick off immediately because that output completed updating that virtual view. So we'll do a couple of checks here. If we look at our raw schema, we can now see that we have standardized columns. So we have 1 column for item, 1 for item size, and 1 for invoice quantity. And then if we go back to our inputs, we can actually see the record counts as well. So we've got 1,692 total records. And once refresh is complete, we'll be able to check our effective record count, which is great. So that finished. So we've got 1,691 total records. And the idea here, if we compare it to the original, is again, in the original source, we had 1,500-ish records, and then we had multiple columns for different types of items. Now what we've done is we've essentially exploded the grain of that data by converting the 1,500 records to roughly 1,690 records that we have here. And so this is, again, a really common use case for when you might use loopback sources. And the really nice thing here is that you don't have to worry about triggers on this source or any sort of setup to make it run on time. Essentially, if you have that original source all set up on a schedule, or you have it trigger in the fashion that you need it to, you can know that this source will always start a new ingestion as soon as that virtual output is completed. So hopefully this helps. Thanks.